What is going on, guys? We are back playing some more Surviving with Create 0.3, and today we are going to be going over an infinite blast furnace, flywheel, and furnace engine setup that allows us to generate infinite rotational power using Create. Now, this is going to be just as interesting as it sounds, so hopefully you guys will find it pretty exciting, and it's also going to be super simple to do, so it should far outclass pretty much any other method of rotational power generation, but you are going to have to listen to a little bit of an explanation as to how we use a couple tips and tricks to make this actually work, because it does require some interesting interactions to get it to function. Now, we obviously have gone over the flywheel and furnace engine sort of generator setup before. We've got it running right up here, and it's hooked up to our tree farm right outside, and it's been working flawlessly. No issues, and it generates us roughly 16,000 stress capacity, as you can see at its current speed. And that is where the important distinction between running it with a furnace and running it with a blast furnace comes in. For those of you that do not know, the furnace will run this setup at 16 RPM, generating the 16,000 stress capacity, which is going to be better than pretty much any other method of rotational power generation in Create, but you can make it even better by running it with a blast furnace, which will do 32 RPM, thus giving us a little bit more than 32,000 stress units, which is obviously insane. Since this is already pretty much the best method, that one just makes it even crazier. So obviously we want to run that if possible, and it's a little bit more difficult theoretically to do because you cannot burn renewable things in the blast furnace. It needs to be either ore or things like tools made out of metal or armor. And so yes, you could technically set up like an iron generator and make tools out of that using automated crafting, and then finally put those in, but that's so large and super complicated to do, so it tends to not be worth it for most people. And if they're going to do this, they end up going with the furnace, which can use things that are renewable like logs from a tree farm. You can cook those down very easily, and then you can even use the coal to run it again. So making a cycle in it is super simple. The setup we're going to go over today circumvents the issue though, where we do not need to continuously supply it with a metal-based item though, and so we only need to give it fuel, which makes it just as easy to run, or actually easier to run, than the setup we have up there that hooks up to a tree farm. So I think this is going to be by far and away the best way to generate power in all of Create. It should be used in pretty much every situation that you can possibly think of, other than maybe some super small scale builds that really don't need much at all. But I have seen this used maybe once or twice before, but those setups have some seriously glaring issues to them that come along with their timer setup. So today we're going to split this episode into two different parts. The first one will be how to make one that is extremely efficient and extremely effective using 0 redstone, which is obviously great. It's crazy easy to do. And then after that, we'll go over how you can tack redstone onto that, and a very small redstone setup at that, to fix all the potential issues you might run into with certain builds. And it will also improve upon all those other setups that people have done in the past with their crazy convoluted redstone that does not actually work. So obviously, I'm basically out of breath now after that lengthy explanation, and I promise there will be more explanations to come, because obviously the setup's easy, but you need to understand why it actually works. But for now, I'm going to say that we can go over the requirements for today's episode, and as you can see, there's basically none. So that's great. This is probably the least we've had in at least 10 episodes now, so I'm super excited. Should be wicked quick, but I've divided it here where at the very top, you have everything you could possibly need to run the setup without any redstone. Then down here on the bottom left, we have everything you need to set up the redstone to run this continuously. And then everything you need on the right here in the bottom is going to be the redstone and miscellaneous things you need to activate the setup if you're using the redstone setup, because you need to make sure that the timing is appropriate. So these are just going to be used to fire it off once and then you get them back. Everything else is going to be used if you want the full redstone based setup, which you're probably not going to need, but I'm going to go over when you would need it and why. So if we pull all this into my inventory right now, we can quickly run over it since there's a lot of duplicates in here, but you are going to need a flywheel, a thing of iron ore, or any ore at that. I'm using iron just because it's what I had laying around, a furnace engine, a chute, a blast furnace, an encased fan, 2 cogwheels, a vertical gearbox. Now you will need 1 gearbox, potentially 2, depending on the direction of rotation, because we need to make sure that it's going in the right way. And so if we need to flip it a second time, we will use a second gearbox. 5 shafts. If you end up using the second gearbox, you only need 4, but if you only use 1 gearbox, you'll need 5. And then this is where the adjustments come in for, what you're using as the fuel. I am using the dried kelp blocks from last episode. If you're using something that is not dried kelp, you're going to have a different timer requirements. So you will need to adjust the amount of adjustable pulse repeaters that you have. But every time you will simply need one adjustable repeater to accompany that. Today I'm using 3 adjustable pulse repeaters. Again, it could go up or down depending on what you're burning, but we'll go over that later. Then you are going to need a gear shift. I would say roughly 27 redstone dust. You could have half a stack. You're probably going to need a little bit more or less depending on how you set it up. I'm going with 27 though, a redstone torch, some form of a button, and a hopper. And that's all we're going to need for today's setup overall. And now we can run to start putting it together. Because again, this should be really quick and really easy to do. So I've set up a room right over here that's pretty close to the dried kelp factory that we have to input in here. I'm not going to do the automated input in today's episode, but I'm probably just going to input it through the floor using an encased fan that pushes the items up into the bottom of the furnace. But for now, we can take a look at how we set this up to start without any redstone. So we're going to want to grab out our blast furnace. And if I don't throw things on the floor, we're going to want to put it right in the center of this room because this is going to require pretty much a 7 long setup, and this will be right in the center. So we've got the blast furnace, and then we're going to put our furnace engine down on the side of that. And then we are going to put our flywheel 2 blocks away. And you can see that this connects the 2 of them. It needs to be that far away to connect. I know this is in the wall. I can expand this room if it bothers you guys that much that this is partially in the wall, but don't worry, it will still run. This is where you grab the rotational power from. And to get this to work, you need the blast furnace to be ignited. Now, this is a very important distinction because it doesn't need to be cooking something. It just needs to be ignited. So the whole trick that this setup works around is by putting in the ore to get it to ignite and immediately pulling the ore out before it cooks it down. Then you can use that same ore just as the ignition tool every single time you need to reignite it. And so that's how the entire setup works. It's really simple to do. So we're going to make it so that we use an encased fan to pull it out and then push it back in using a chute that is directly above this. So we're going to put down a chute right on top of here, and we can right click it with the wrench so that we can see what's inside. It makes it a little bit easier to understand the setup when you can see it getting pulled in and out. And then we're going to come on top of here, and we're going to take our encased fan and toss it down right like that, facing down into here. If you guys don't know, if you look at this right here, it says no attached fans. Technically there is one, it's just not running, but it says items move downward. If you have a fan that pulls items back, it'll pull items up, and this allows us to suck the iron ore right out the top of this and hold it in here. So it's what makes the whole setup possible, and this is where you're probably going to have to make sure your rotation is going correctly. But then all we're going to do for this is put down a gearbox right over here. We're going to put down our vertical gearbox right in front of the blast furnace. Well, not like that. We should orient it properly, I guess, like that. Then we are going to put down our shafts, and we can grab out our cogwheels. So shafts to, not right there, shafts to connect this gearbox to the vertical one, then 2 shafts to come up, and finally, if I can place it down, a cogwheel right there, and a cogwheel right here. Now, we could change these with encased chain drives or a belt to connect these two if the rotation is not correct, just so we wouldn't have to put down a second gearbox. But either way, we want to make sure that when this is running and this is getting rotational power, it pulls the iron ore out. So that's the real important check for the rotational power generation. So first things first, we want to put the dried kelp blocks in here, and then we want to toss the iron ore in. And you can see the minute it starts running, this gets sucked out of here because the way that this is running is going to pull it up because the fan is sucking it up. So you can see in here, the fan is pulling from above. You can even see the particle animation inside here with the air going up, and it says it contains 1 iron ore. Now, the way that this will work is once this thing stops burning, which will take 100 seconds, then this rotational power will stop. This will quickly drop the iron ore back in, and it will start up again. Now, the downtime for this is roughly half a second or less every 100 seconds. So The reason that this setup works for a majority of things is if you're, say, making an iron generator, gold generator, any of the factories we've done recently, it doesn't matter if there's a slight half-second or less blip in the rotational power. It's not going to affect your efficiency. It's not going to break anything. So you could simply use this setup right here, 0 redstone, nothing like that, and this will generate you your almost 33,000 stress capacity to work with, which is crazy. It's so simple. And a huge issue is people try to time this with redstone, and what they do is they have a timer that constantly pushes it back down and pulls it back up every 2 seconds, but that still runs into downtime. And we're going to go over why that doesn't work every time, but eventually that will run into downtime regardless, even if it's not as frequent as this one. And regardless, that still poses an issue for the same builds. Now, the builds that this causes problems for are contraption-based setups. So things like this right over here. Now, not every contraption-based setup will have an issue, but if you guys remember when we set up this wheat farm, I discussed how if you stop this arm from running, you stop supplying it with rotational power, the mechanical bearing will place all those blocks down. They will become tangible, and then they will cause the soil to become untilled, or whatever block is where they are will break. And obviously, if you do that enough, your setup will be ruined. This can cause issues with things like farms like this. In things like a sugarcane farm, it's not a problem because it's not going to ruin the sugarcane at the base that's growing. So again, it's not even an issue with every single contraption, but ones like this or potentially things hooked up to gantry shafts and all that will have issues. Rope pulleys potentially, anything that when it stops, it places the blocks down and could potentially break something important around it that's used for the setup need to not be hooked up to this if it's going to have downtime. Because the minute that this thing shuts off, if you're powering that farm with it, it's going to place the blocks down and get rid of those seeds, and then you lose out on all that farmland. And eventually you're going to lose out on majority of it in all 4 cardinal directions, and that's just going to be a huge issue. Now, all those setups that I've seen end up running into that issue, just not as frequently, but eventually your setup's going to break. So the only way around that is going to be by using a redstone timer. And the reason that those setups fail is because the redstone timer needs to be exact for what you are burning all the way down to 1 tick, which people usually don't want to do, but I'm going to go over today how to do it. And there's also some nuances that come along with it that even if you do the math out, you need to know, otherwise you're going to mess it up. So I will say again that this works for 95, maybe 99% of setups or processing, factories, anything like that. You don't need to worry about the blip in the rotational power, so you can keep it simple and avoid the redstone. But for those of you that want to make sure that 100% it will work, and you just saw it go down and up right there while I'm rambling to ignite it again so you know it works. But for those of you that want it to be 100% perfect all the time, we're going to go over how to set up the redstone for that right now. So we're going to grab this stuff out. And the first thing that we need to do is put down our gear shift. So that's going to go right here. This is going to be used to flip the rotation and forcefully push it down and pull it back up, since we can no longer use the stopping of the rotation to make it go down. And then we're going to basically just run redstone over here. We need to make sure it pushes into the gear shift, and we do not want to use the repeater because, again, ticks are extremely important here. So you do not want to use anything other than regular redstone, other than when you're setting up the clock, which we're going to do right over here. And that's because it's going to make it way more complicated for you to calculate things out. I know it's math, don't be scared. But okay, so now we need to set up this, and buckle up because we're going to be doing some math and I'm going to be talking through it. But basically, with dried kelp blocks, they burn for 200 seconds in a regular furnace. When you put those into a blast furnace, it doubles the speed at which stuff is cooked, which is normally 10 seconds, but goes down to 5, and also doubles the speed at which it consumes the fuel. So that goes from 200 to 100 seconds. Now this is important because both of those numbers are critical. We cannot let the iron ore sit inside the blast furnace for 5 seconds or more, otherwise it gets cooked down. So that's critical to know just out the gate. Then the 100 seconds we need to know because we need to make it so that this clock that we're going to be setting up cycles every 100 seconds exactly. If it's off by even a single tick, and this is why you run into the issue when you have the setups that, let's say, the one that I saw, I think that was the original creation, had a timer every 2 seconds, it would push it down and up. And you would think that, okay, because, you know, every single burnable thing is going up by at least, a factor of, I don't know, it's like 20 seconds or something. It's all though, in multiples of 10, that if you did it every 2 seconds, that you really wouldn't run into an issue that frequently, or you could time it properly. If you did it, maybe say, let's say every second, you flipped it back and forth. But because of how the create redstone blocks accidentally, I think, add on additional ticks here and there, and I guess it's not here and there, it's every time we'll be going over, it ends up getting off kilter and it will not be exact. So you need to make sure that everything is perfect with this. So we need to, every 100 seconds, go through the loop, trigger it to hold for sub 5 seconds, to then ignite this and pull it back up. So with 100 seconds, we have to set up multiple of these because of just how the timing works. So we'll put redstone right here, and then we are going to have our adjustable repeater. And this is critical. It needs to be the adjustable repeater put down out into this redstone that connects here. And this is going to be set to whatever you want sub 5 seconds, because this is what's going to hold it inside the furnace. So we're going to set this to 3 seconds for my setup. 3 seconds should be more than enough. It's less than 5, so it won't get cooked down, but it's nice enough to work with. So we'll do 3. Then we are going to be placing down an adjustable pulse repeater right here, and then 2 more right here, and then we'll just connect these like this. Now I do it like this because I think it's a little bit easier to visualize. I know you could probably flip this over to make it more compact, but basically what we are going to do here is set this one to 1 minute. So we're going to scroll this all the way up, and the reason we're doing that is because once we get to 1 minute, when we cross over, it goes to 2. So we need 100 seconds. We've got 3 right here. So that's going to bring it down to 97. Then we need to get this up to 1 minute because that's going to be 60. So now we are left with needing 37 seconds, which means we need another one of these to scroll it up to get 37 seconds. Now right here, this would be the exact amount we need, but this does not account for the ticks that are added by these blocks right here. These create redstone based blocks or timers or whatever you want to call them, add in 1 additional tick that is not listed here each. I have not confirmed this with mod authors. I can always ask, but I've confirmed this through trial and error. I left these running, and the way that you make it work perfectly is by adding on, or I should say subtracting from this timer 1 tick for every one of these. And I've used multiple types of fuel sources to test this out over the course of a day, running it consistently in the background. And the only one that doesn't have blips in rotational power by setting this off kilter from the timer are ones that add 1 tick for every single one of these. So if you're using something like logs and you set this up, you're going to need 3 of these. So you'll end up setting it 3 ticks less than you should. For us, we are going to set this to 16 ticks because that is going to be 4 ticks under a second. And then we bring this down to 36. So right here, we are going to have 1 minute, so 60 seconds, 3 seconds, so 63, and then 36, so 99 seconds and 16 ticks. Plus the 4 from these makes 100 seconds exactly. So once this gets running, this will be timed perfectly. Now, the important thing to note, if you set this up with redstone, is hit F3, hit G, and you will see the chunk boundaries that you are in. This needs to be in a single chunk, because if it unloads and reloads the chunk, you need the redstone to have frozen. This still risks breaking. Obviously, redstone is finicky, but to make sure it doesn't break as best you can with a timer, you need to make sure that they are all in the same chunk. You don't want this burning or running when the redstone is not running, and vice versa. You do not want the redstone running when this isn't. So when the chunk unloads, you need to make sure that everything in here unloads at the same time. So again, just important to make sure it's all in one chunk. Once you have that, you should be good to start this up. Okay guys, so it took me a second to work through how to get this going and initiate it properly with the more compact setup that I have right here. I had it a little bit more spaced out when I was initially testing this out, so making sure the redstone interacted properly was a bit easier. But basically what we need to do is get this hopper to allow ore to go through it from being disabled initially when we push a button, while also supplying redstone power to this dust right here. We don't want it to start on this side of the timer, and I'll explain why in a second. We want it to start here. So all we need to do is put down, if I can put it down properly, so that we have a redstone torch right here disabling this. And then I believe we should be good to simply go like this and just kind of wind the redstone down right here. And then if we were to push a button, let's say hooked up on the wall right here, it will make it so that this is able to drop the iron ore in while simultaneously starting this timer at this pulse repeater right here. Now, I will quickly say the reason this is important is because this is going to basically subtract 16 ticks, or I guess it would be almost 19 ticks because of these tick delay here. We just don't have this one off the first round, so almost a second. That is really, really important because we need to make sure that the ore is able to be there maybe a second before it needs to be reinitiated. And if it were to be perfectly timed on the first go around, the ore is going to go in as it needs to be reinitiated. We want it a little bit before. It's going to sit in there for 3 seconds, so we have a 3-second buffer that we can have it start before it gets pulled out. Now, once it goes through the first time, it'll then adjust itself. So this will be put in then every time, 19 ticks before it needs to be reignited, and then it will consistently do that all the way through. So it works out perfectly. Otherwise, you will still have downtime if you don't get it set up correctly. So make sure when you initiate it, you make it so that it is done like this. But now we want to make sure we put the fuel in here and we can test this out. So if we hit this button, it should start everything up. So there we go. We can see that the iron gets pulled out because this is now running. It's been ignited. And now all we got to do is just get rid of this stuff right here. It doesn't matter anymore. This does not need to be here. Neither does this, neither does that. And we don't even need this hopper anymore. All we need is this simple redstone clock right here. Super easy to do. Again, it needs to be all in one chunk just so that you do not need to worry about this loading and unloading. And so once you have all that set up, we can watch this run a single time and keep an eye on it. Obviously, the burn time is going to be a minute and a half basically for this, but we can watch as this fires off. A couple of things to note, these need to be pulse repeaters just because we want the signal to not last that duration. This one's different because we need it to hold for 3 seconds and it's not going to have an issue where it loops back before this is done. But you can see it's now running properly, and I guess I'll hop back when this is basically at the bottom and ready to reinitiate itself. Okay guys, so this is getting pretty low. Now we're going to be cutting it really close. It's going to be less than a second before it needs to be reignited, but we should be able to see out the corner that it's going to go in and not stop the rotational power. So we'll be able to see it should fire off here. It goes back in. The rotational power does not get stopped and it gets pulled out right before it starts filling up the arrowhead portion of this, comes back to the top, and this one is already getting ready to go again. Now, you might think that you have it set up properly. It's going to take about 2 hours at most to verify that it's working correctly. It could be a little bit more if you have this set to more than 3 seconds. The idea is basically you could be off by even just 1 tick, which means that for every second of buffer, which here is 3 seconds, which would be 60 ticks, you are going to need a full cycle here to check that it works. So in this case, if we were to have 1 tick off, let's say this was 15, like when I was testing it, well, then you're going to have to do 60 cycles and it's going to take almost 2 minutes per cycle. So 2 hours. So once this is run for about 2 hours, maybe a bit more if you have this a bit higher, or even more if you're using something like a block of coal or even a bucket of lava, you'll be able to verify that it is in fact working. If it wasn't working properly and the timer was wrong a little bit, then by that point you would have hit where this will be put in there incorrectly and it will have stopped before. An easy way to check this I have done is to set up a simple wheat farm just like this and not even plant the wheat, maybe just have it, 2 on each side. And basically you can make it so that if the rotational power stops, it's going to get rid of the tilled soil. And so in my creative world, I tested it simply by setting one of these up and tilling the soil every time I started a new trial. And if I came back after 2 hours and the soil was not tilled, that meant that it stopped at some point and the redstone was not working. And I was able to test this setup with this exact timer and everything, let it run for 24 hours consistently, and nothing broke, which means it is perfect. So if you guys have to do some other timing, hopefully I told you how to do it appropriately, but you can feel free to ask in the comments and I will try to do out the math for you. I don't mind doing that, but that is going to be it for today's episode, guys. Keeping it short and sweet. I know I rambled a lot, but it is super, super critical that you understand why this works, because chances are you're going to have a different fuel source. You're going to have to troubleshoot it a bit yourself if you plan on using the redstone. But Either way, it should work for most setups without the redstone, so you don't need to burden yourself with it. But I thought to myself, people are going to complain if I don't go over how to make it without a potential delay in here occasionally. So I had to do this. Made the video take like an extra day to do research for, but here we are. So hopefully you guys enjoyed this. This setup is going to be probably one of the most useful ones overall, and also one of the most painful ones to research for. But I think it's well worth it in the end. And that's going to be it for today, guys. I will talk to you later.